Part 4. Sons of Cthonia. Stand to the last. Few worthy enemies can be overthrown with a single strike, which is why I have 2 axes. Ithan Rave, captain of the 68th Company of the Sons of Horus. Well, defeat is always possible. A veteran legionary and son of Cthonia meets it with the stoicism of a true warrior. Veren Ashurhadden, lord of the true sons of Cthonia. Lord Castellan Garius did not have to wait long for new enemy actions. While trying to curb his fury over the traitor's victory and his own humiliation, Atlas Terminal fell under the assault of the Sons of Horus. It was not the vanguard of the great host, entrenched under the shadow of the distant Vorhek Mountains, but a threat Garius considered destroyed. The remnants of the 68th and 5th Companies of the Sons of Horus. Hidden in the wastelands behind the Atrakan Peninsula, seeking to lick their wounds and regroup, they emerged just as the Loyalists committed the bulk of their forces to battles far from the central fortifications. The True Sons circumvented the poisoned seas of Cthonia aboard their Thunderhawks, flanked the enemy defences, and struck at the isolated Atlas Terminal. Such was the revenge of Chieftain Rav for his humiliation. His wounded body crudely patched with combat augmetics, he personally led the first assault squads on the terminal. Since most of the Imperial Fists were still in retreat after the failed attempt to prevent the traitor's landing, only limited garrison forces were stationed inside the terminal. Less than 100 Imperial Fists in total, supported by a cohort of solar auxilia from Necromunda, defended Atlas, facing the onslaught of more than 2,000 Sons of Horus. There were barely enough warriors to hold the terminal's walls. These walls were a formidable barrier taller than the Leviathan siege dreadnought and additionally thick enough to withstand the fire of any guns, except the mighty cannons of battle titans. Yet the defenders' small number remained their vulnerable point. Only key sections of the fortifications were defended by veterans of the Imperial Fists, while the rest of the walls were held by lightly equipped solar auxilia. Chieftain Rave tasked small units of skirmishers and snipers from the Sons of Horus to slow and confuse the Imperial Fists, applying enough pressure on well-defended sections of the walls to pin the defenders in place, yet without provoking the enemy into a decisive counterattack. Precise shots from Nemesis bolters targeted officers, while salvos of frag missiles rained shrapnel and flames onto the parapets, leaving the defenders without a single chance to react to Rave's true intentions. Veteran Terminator units of the 5th Company and raiders from the 68th raised improvised assault ramps, aiming at sections of the walls without Imperial Fist squads, giving the defenders not a second of respite. Seeking revenge for their humiliation during the failed landing operation, the cumbersome Terminators of the Sons of Horus embodied a force that the Necromundan troops of the Imperial army could not hope to stop, only delay through their sacrifice, hoping that reinforcements from the main part of the garrison might reach them before the last soldier fell. However, Garius had too few troops to send them aid. A convoy of Spartan assault tanks carrying elite rangers of the 5th Company was dispatched with all possible haste, but the few short hours it would take them to reach the objective would seal the Necromundan cohort's fate to a gruesome demise at the hands of the vengeful Sons of Horus. With no choice but to hold their ground, the solar auxilia offered staunch resistance. Arcing volleys of Volkite beams streaked along all walls as the Sons of Horus began their assault. Nevertheless, for every teal-armoured Terminator they managed to bring down, 4 more forced their way through their defences. The Terminators turned those brave and foolish enough to oppose them atop the walls into bloody remnants, while the survivors fled to the temporary refuge of the next redoubt, the warriors of the True Sons on their heels. A few scattered squads of the Imperial Fists managed to come to the aid of their junior comrades. The 7th Legionnaires fought to the last, to hold back the teal tide, racing across the walls for even a few brief moments. Yet even the valiant Sons of Dawn could not withstand the fury and numerical superiority of the foe. Chief Rave stood on the threshold of redemption. Victory would exonerate his failure, and he carved a path to the gates of Terminal Atlas, heedless of the damage inflicted on his battered body during battle. Each swing of his axes claimed the life of another loyalist, and every enemy that crossed his path brought the chief closer to victory, to triumph, a balm that could heal the pain of his wounds. This was the way of the true sons, as Rave envisioned it. Facing the enemy in open combat, where skill meets skill in honest contest, and he revelled in it on Cthonia, as if each defeated foe made him stronger, bringing the chief closer to the status of a true son of Horus. Yet Rave was not the only warrior fighting that day, striving to prove themselves. And when the leader of the Inductii cleaved the helmet of an imperial fist, marked with a master sergeant's chevrons, the parapet around him erupted in a sudden maelstrom of lightning, cracking like a living entity. Suddenly, the walls of the fortress filled with warriors in brilliant red and gold. One by one, their figures emerged from the gates of the torn reality to engage the sons of Horus. On the battle armour of each was carefully engraved the letter M, symbol of the old 15th Legion, used before Magnus assumed command. They were the warriors of the Thousand Sons, and they had come to fight for Garius and the Emperor. Leading them was Sul-Contep, who had fought on Prospero many years ago to save his legion from the Space Wolves. And now he was ready to face the sons of Horus, to save it once more. The walls erupted in terrible flames and the actinic glow of kind shields as the Thousand Sons spearheaded a new assault against the traitors, finally managing to halt their onslaught. The axes of the chieftain Rave met Sul-Contep's power spear as they engaged in a fierce duel on the walls of Atlas Terminal, each striving to prove themselves and achieve victory at any cost, unwilling to retreat. As the two commanders hacked and thrust, shedding each other's blood, tearing through armour and flesh, the warriors around them fought with no less ferocity. The crude augmentations binding Rave's torn flesh contended with the psychic power coursing through Sul-Contep. With the arrival of the Thousand Sons, the loyalists matched the traitors in strength, yet the sons of Horus still held the breach they had torn in the walls, and dislodging them was no easy task. For several dreadful moments, the battle reached a stalemate, both sides enacting a grim blood harvest, with the ramparts strewn with corpses and the wounded falling from the walls as the combat raged around them. In all likelihood, the combatants would have ground each other to dust had they continued to fight, neither giving nor asking for quarter. But the arrival of 10 Spartan assault tanks and the rangers of the 5th Company of the Imperial Fists decisively shifted the situation in favour of the Loyalists. Exhausted and worn from the duel, Sul-Contep and Rave were forced apart as the sons of Horus retreated. The Inductii chieftain was once more denied victory, and this time the enemy shamed him even more. All that chieftain Rave would carry from the battle was the rage that poisoned his hearts and the wounds inflicted by Sul-Contep. As the humiliated chieftain boarded one of the Thunderhawk transports, awaiting to evacuate and save what remained of the attacking forces of the sons of Horus, he vowed that one day he would return and do everything possible to claim the victory that was rightfully his. The Feast of Vultures. After the battle for Atlas Terminal concluded, Garius gathered his commanders, fortifying the defences and demanding that the forces returning from the west hasten their pace. The tyrant of Cthonia was resolute that he would not tolerate further breaches in the defences and would not allow mistakes to blemish his record, lest Rogel Dawn conclude that, after winning the battle, Garius had failed to fulfil his duty properly. The legionaries of the Thousand Sons who had saved Atlas Terminal were begrudgingly congratulated by Lord Castellan Garius through clenched teeth, as he hinted that the sole reason the warriors of the 15th had been in place to repel the enemy assault was because he had denied them the opportunity to join the main force dispatched westward. Garius harboured no trust for the twice traitors of the Thousand Sons, and the fact that it was they who allowed him to retain his honour was a source of immeasurable irritation to him. In turn, Sul-Contep made no comment on such treatment, for the newly regained respect from other loyalist commanders was reward enough for him. A few days before the main garrison forces returned to the Presidium Arcs, the return journey marked by only minor skirmishes. The Alpha Legion's headhunters pursued the retreating loyalists and probed the outer ring of defences. However, now that the loyalists had received reinforcements and were ready to repay the traitors for recent losses, Varen Ashahadin ordered all his forces to avoid large-scale engagements, and the war on Cthonia entered a new phase. Both armies, loyalists and traitors alike, seemed to have exhausted their zeal for the overwhelming force of the initial attacks, when they hoped to sweep away enemy troops in a single decisive battle, as often happened during the years of the Great Crusade. Nonetheless, as with many battles that occurred during the Horus heresy, a clash of pure power between the Legiones Astartes would lead to disaster, a slaughter in which scavengers invariably became the only winners. Garius secluded himself in the stratagem of the Presidium of Arcs, devising plan after plan in a bid to reverse the dire situation that threatened to crush him and forever taint him in the eyes of the Primarch. The officers of the Loyalist garrison received increasingly belligerent orders from their commander via the tactical network and Vox, with only a select few called to briefings in the stratagem. Chief among them was Captain Consul Adarus, whose command tank had escaped the massacre at Shaitan Chalice. He acted as Garius's representative to the other legions defending Cthonia, and his boundless bravery combined with sincere honesty allowed the veteran to earn trust, even among those who were irritated by Garius's growing detachment. Shadow Captain Nethkal of the Raven Guard was dispatched to the Yedig sector in the north, where he was tasked with countering the Alpha Legion's raids with the warriors of the Shattered Legions and the Imperial Fists. To the south, beyond the spire of Zika, Garius concentrated his most powerful armoured forces, from cohorts of the Imperial Army to the Cerberus and Typhon tanks of the Iron Hands, hoping to thwart the enemy's advance towards the colossal ruins of the Traitor's Gate. The 1,000 sons and their overseers from the Silent Sisterhood were sent to the depths, where together with the Rangers of the 5th Company they waged a shadow war to contain the traitor forces in the underworld. And in the very heart of it, Garius disregarded his defences, pulling many veteran units back to the Presidium Arcs, relying on the strength of the outer perimeter walls to hold back the enemy. In turn, Varen Ashahadin and the army of traitors faced challenges of a far more straightforward nature. The victory at Shaitan Chalice was bought at the cost of numerous lives and war machines, while many of the Titans sustained severe damage from the improvised landing operation and the suicidal charge of Legio Astraman. Worse still, the battle nearly exhausted the limited supplies hurriedly brought in to destroy the main part of the Loyalist forces. The traitors could not afford another prolonged engagement until they had fortified their positions and replenished supplies, despite the eagerness of some captains and commanders to advance. Those impatient to continue the assault, such as the leader Rave and Archmagos Dracovac, were allowed by Varen to act at their own risk, while the rest were instructed to transform the improvised landing zone into a full-fledged fortress. Finally returning to Cthonia, Varen tirelessly prepared his army for the upcoming battles. Daily gatherings of the Captain's Council, endless combat drills, and a series of duels and tests that were part of the martial culture of the Sons of Horus. It seemed that in those days Varen managed to be everywhere. As the Lord of the True Sons, he adhered to the highest standards of what he considered the ideals of a Chthonian warrior: ferocity, tenacity, ruthlessness, but at the same time a certain noble mien. With such a number of inductii within the ranks of the 16th, Ashahadin saw it as his duty to personally demonstrate the very honour for which they fought, to reclaim both Cthonia and the heart of the Legion, for among the precepts of his home planet was the wisdom: a warrior learns from both friends and foes, he emulates the best until he can surpass them. The Wall. Across the Chthonian wastelands, the Imperial Fists erected dozens of sections of walls and fortified outposts, forming an interconnected system of defensive structures known within the ranks of the garrison as the Wall. This system included one massive inner wall stretching over 100 kilometers westward from the Traitor's Gate and blocking the main approach to the Presidium Arcs, as well as several segments of the outer wall, each functioning as a small fortress meant to delay and intercept any attempts at a large-scale assault on the inner perimeter. Finally, Scattered among the Cthonian wastelands were several dozen outposts, each hosting no more than 50 warriors. These small strongholds were intended for use as early warning stations and artillery correction posts, should the traitors land in significant force. In addition, concealed minefields were placed at key points of the surrounding territory. This entire interconnected system was managed and controlled from the Presidium arcs. Tricks and counterplays. Since both Lord Castellangarius and Captain Varen were unwilling to embark on a full-scale assault and remained steadfast to their own plans, the conflict on Cthonia transformed into a rapid war of raids and skirmishes. The battlefield of this war became a series of small forts, erected by the Imperial Fists on the vast plains of the Yedic Expanse, to the west of the Traitor's Gate and the Presidium Arcs. Each fort was a miniature fortress in its own right, complete with its own walls, artillery and sensor systems linked to the strategium of the Presidium Arcs. Effectively, they served as the eyes of Lord Castellangarius. By striking these isolated outposts, the traitors sought not only to stain their blades, but also to blind the loyalist forces, while the advanced riders of the garrison fought to preserve these points and track the movements of the traitors in the Chthonian wilderness. At the forefront of these battles were the Alpha Legion and the Raven Guard, both renowned masters of sudden strikes and covert ambushes. Incursus and his headhunters launched attacks across the wastes, laying traps for supply convoys and loyalist patrols with lethal agility. Often it was reported that elite fighters of the Alpha Legion were present in several places simultaneously. In turn, the Mordathan of the Raven Guard reaped no less grand a harvest of traitorous lives. Their skills in tracking and stealth were unparalleled, and many raiding parties of the renegades were pursued right to their hidden bases, after which the Raven Guards slaughtered the enemies as they rested. Nevertheless, the struggle characteristic of these two rival legions effectively represented a personal confrontation between Incursus and Cadus Nex, the assassin of the Raven Guard. Each sought to outplay and destroy the other. From the infamous siege of Outpost Phi 19 to the brutal 8-day ambush in the Serpent's Jaws, two elite marksmen and killers hunted each other with damage sufficient for an entire company of the Legiones Astartes accompanying them, yet neither managed to deliver a decisive blow to the other. Nevertheless, the riders of the Imperial Fist's 19th Company, named the Golden Griffins, and the heavy assault detachments of the 5th Company of the Sons of Horus likewise became worthy adversaries for each other. The indomitable Sky Hunters employed their full speed to dash from one outpost to another, disrupting the siege operations of the traitors with volleys of embedded weaponry and pursuing the enemy wherever they could be found. Many isolated garrisons praised the golden flare on the horizon, which heralded the arrival of the Golden Griffins, while the raiding commanders of the Sons of Horus cursed the thunder of their legion's guns when they had to quickly retreat to avoid artillery fire. In contrast to the Loyalists, the Sons of Horus made no attempt to operate covertly. Instead, they used their jump packs to leap across wastelands, announcing each of their attacks with the roar of vox horns. Their enemies knew that this sound was equivalent to the announcement of a death sentence. Once having roared about their advance, the Sons of Horus did not retreat, and left nothing behind but the dead. Scattered among the vast wastelands, the outposts of the Imperial Fists resembled islands amid a raging sea, for the possession of which a merciless war was being waged. Between them raged bloody battles, with each side striving to take control of these key objectives and prevent them from falling into enemy hands. Each trick was accompanied by a counter-strike from the enemy, each victory turned into a success for the opponent elsewhere. For every conquest or territory hold was followed by a loss somewhere else. Both loyalists and traitors were stuck in a bloody stalemate in which neither side could break the other. Nevertheless, it took only a small shift in the protracted confrontation to disrupt the balance and breathe new life into the fury marked in the first battles of the siege of Cthonia. Something that lurks beneath the ground. The war engulfing Cthonia raged not only on the plains. Warriors of both sides continued to fight in the silent darkness below. Fractal tunnels, some scarcely wide enough for a single fighter, while others were large enough for some less cumbersome machinery to traverse, stretched across the entire planet. These labyrinths were well known to the veterans of the Sons of Horus, granting them a strategic advantage over the Imperial Fists. However, the situation was complicated by the limited number of points through which heavy combat units could be deployed. Most notable among these were the auxiliary gates located beneath the Traitor's Gate. Within quick reach from the Traitor's landing zone, only the vast chasm known as the Serpent's Jaws allowed the Sons of Horus to penetrate into the subterranean world. Moreover, it served as a transit point for local nomadic tribes, but the warriors of the 16th were determined to seize this territory as quickly as possible and establish their own garrison there. Reconnaissance units, composed of the oldest veterans of the Sons of Horus, scattered through the tunnels in search of old refuges and allies from the distant past. These Sons of Cthonia quickly discovered several key factors in the current situation, the most important of which was that the true Sons of Ashur-Hadon were not the only force of the traitorous armies on Cthonia. Deep within the planet's bowels, remnants of the original garrison still hid, although they had long since dwindled to a few thousand warriors using looted weapons and equipment to conduct ineffective raids on the surface. Their commander, Centurion Boros Kern, held his own fortress in the ancient mining tunnels not far from Chthonia's core, in the so-called Tyrant's Lair, where safe passages were known only to the natives of this world and where loyalists dared not to venture. This was the secret that Veren Ashur-Hadon carefully concealed, ensuring that his own scouts did not inadvertently warn the Imperial Fists of this grim stronghold beneath their feet. These defiant warriors had been fighting against Lord Castellan Garius from their secret base for nearly a decade. They provided Veren with numerous new insights, fortifications and fresh warriors to deploy in his operations. Both surviving Sons of Horus and the Chthonian gangs fighting alongside them. Many of the latter underwent elevation to the ranks of the Inductii at a speed that made them far less stable than those fighting on the surface, but in numbers that Garius could not even fathom. A network of hidden villages and fortified underground passages mirrored the Imperial Fist's outposts on the surface, except under the control of traitors, and like the loyalist fortifications above, it was besieged. The Imperial Fists organized expeditions into the underworld to scorch out the remaining Sons of Horus and take control of the massive subterranean population. At the head of the raiding parties were veteran rangers of the 5th Company of the Imperial Fists, warriors whose excellent combat training in zones of Mortalis served them well in the battles within the Chthonian Inferno. Now with the esoteric power of the Thousand Suns supporting them at Garius's order, the traitors, hiding in the underground, found themselves in a dire situation, with many of their strongholds being burned and destroyed by the enemy's ethereal might. To successfully counter the force of the Thousand Suns, Archmagos Dracovac unleashed a wave of Vorax battle automata into the labyrinth beneath the Yedig space. Capable of moving effortlessly in utter darkness and impervious to the sorcerer's tricks, these soulless machines were programmed to stay within the designated zone, avoiding the hidden underground strongholds of the Sons of Horus and destroying everything in their path. In the event of the destruction of one machine, even more Vorax would emerge in its place, given over to inhuman madness, a true barrage of metallic claws that never tire or yield. Huge swarms of automatons, whose metallic claws feared not the warp flames of the Thousand Suns, forced the Loyalists to hold on to the larger upper galleries in the east, where their heavy weapons and kine shields could counter this inanimate horde. Led not by loyalty nor duty, the automatons rampaged beneath the Yedig space, killing and incinerating, pushing back the Loyalists, but also exterminating the mortal Chthonian inhabitants dwelling in the dark. Dracovac deemed such sacrifices unworthy of attention if they contributed to victory. Captain Ashur-Hadon himself did not wish to needlessly sacrifice Chthonian blood, which he hoped to use for resurrecting his legion, but was compelled to acknowledge that, in the event of success, the death of a few thousand Chthonian nomads would seem insignificant. The key to victory In pursuit of success, the warriors of the Imperium once more resorted to destroying what they fought for. Although Varen judged that the sacrifice of a single small part of the underground world was not too high a price for victory, the slaughter in the dungeons would become the key to the massacre on the surface, for where Imperial forces had previously cornered traitor shooters, Dracovac handed Ashur-Haden the perfect weapon to turn the tide. Nearly a month had passed since the rebels executed the landing, and now they possessed sufficient ammunition and equipment which could not be said about repairing the damage done to their Titans. Moreover, it was worth remembering that the delay in this war of strikes and disappearances threatened to result in the rapid depletion of resupplied reserves. Fortunately, the intelligence gathered from reconnaissance raids, combined with information provided by Boros Kern, exposed several key vulnerabilities in the Loyalist defences. The resolute defensive actions of the Raven Guard in the north and the tanks stationed in the south demonstrated that these areas were the toughest nuts for the attackers. Yet in the central area, the raiders of the Alpha Legion encountered much less resistance. Some warbands of the Sons of Horus dared to pass by the outposts beneath Yedig's space and inspect the outer walls, noting the limited number of defenders present on the parapets. However, to exploit this weakness and rally all his forces to the walls, Ashur-Haden first needed to destroy the fortified outposts so that the fighters there could not warn their comrades about the enemy's advance or delay his warriors' progress in prolonged, exhausting sieges. At least half a dozen of these fortifications needed to be captured or destroyed as soon as possible to ensure the surprise of the assault. In the War Council, Captain Varen meticulously, yet with the swiftness inherent to all operations of the Legiones Astartes, laid out his plans. Incursus and his bounty hunters were ordered to intensify their attacks in the north, while the remaining traitor titans, including the colossal Imperus Nox, were to gather south of the Shaitan Chalice. Both these ruses aimed to divert as many of the defenders' forces as possible. At the same time, columns of the Sons of Horus and the Word-Bearers were to make a swift march across the wastelands to simultaneously position themselves to bombard the outposts and prevent the defenders from sending a warning to the main garrison. The privilege of delivering the final stroke of this masterpiece fell to Archmagos Dracovac, for the decisive blow was to be struck not from outside, but from within. The first thing that the small garrisons of the Imperial Fists noticed in the Phi 19, 21 and 36 outposts, as well as Theta 3, 7 and 9, was the sudden eruption of ashen-grey soil within the walls of their modest fortresses. The rotating noses of the termite assault drill transports broke the surface of the ground, their drill heads scattering clouds of dirt in all directions. And following this, Vorak's battle automata surged from the newly formed passages. The frenzied automata literally flooded each of the complexes with their bodies. The Imperial Fists rushed to defend their fortifications, releasing one rapid, precise bolter volley after another, only to suddenly discover that the Sons of Horus had taken advantage of the distraction and managed to scale the now empty walls, appearing directly behind the back of the defenders. Virtually all the outposts fell in less than an hour, and only the defenders of Theta 9 managed to hold out for an hour of desperate, frenzied melee, selling their lives dearly to send their comrades a brief and garbled warning. Nevertheless, despite the distress signal, no relief forces came to their aid, and the distant walls remained silent and untouched, their defenders evidently unaware of the slaughter unfolding amidst the wastelands, as well as the fate awaiting them. The Sons of Horus granted their enemy the sole mercy the warriors of Cthonia knew, a swift death, and in short order all the outposts were either in the hands of the traitors or were destroyed. The tech priests from Cyclothraith set about analysing the cogitators of the captured bases, continuing to gather all possible data even after Ashur-Haden ordered the main assault to commence. 3 full companies of the Sons of Horus and the Word-Bearers from the Flayed Hand Order, all as one on-board armoured transport, surged forward. Their target was the central section of the outer wall, the weakest point of the defence, and with its destruction, Varen, Ashur-Haden and his warriors intended to shatter all loyalist hopes. a breach in the wall. Similar to the smaller, already fallen outposts, the outer wall of the Imperial Fist's citadel was not a single continuous fortification like the inner wall, but a sequence of separate fortresses. They were positioned at all strategically important points of the wastelands, ensuring any enemy attack would falter before reaching the inner wall. Additionally, each fortress served as a base for the contingent of the Imperial Fists, capable of swiftly counterattacking the hampered enemy forces. These bastions were massive edifices, able to shelter 1,000 warriors of the Legiones Astartes, and withstand anything but the fire of the most powerful guns. In short, a true masterpiece of fortification craftsmanship, created by the masters of the 7th Legion. Even the combined might of the entire traitorous host would have to pay a brutal, bloody tribute to capture such bastions by storm, which would certainly rob the battle-weary rebels of any chance to effectively oppose the even more formidable defences of the inner wall. However, the bastion, at the very centre of the outer line of defence, remained vulnerable to attack, as Garrius had recalled many of its garrison soldiers to defend the Arx Presidium and the Traitor's Gate. At the top of the central wall fortress, the bastion of Alf Prime, Captain Consul Adarus commanded hardly 500 warriors. This appointment served as punishment for Adarus due to his fiasco at the Battle of the Shaitan Chalice, where he was the senior officer and, consequently, bore responsibility for the failure. These troops were barely sufficient to man the defences, and the defenders had no reserves to rely on in the event of a truly serious assault. Neighbouring fortresses were similarly deprived of some of their troops, though not to the same extent as the one commanded by Adarus, which to observers on both sides seemed a death sentence filled with malice for the veteran commander. Given such evident weakness, Veren ordered the primary strike against the central fortress. The main forces of the traitors would concentrate there, aiming to breach the defences and secure a clear path to the inner wall, while other combat elements would ensure flank protection to avoid falling into a trap set by the loyalists. The traitors' armoured units and cyclothrother battle automata formed the flanking forces, unyielding and indomitable bastions, blocking any attempts by the adversary to flank the traitor host or trap the heavy infantry of the Legiones Astartes advancing on the Alf Prime bastion. As the traitors had anticipated, the destruction of the outposts gave them the advantage of surprise. The Alf Prime bastion stood alone, and while the renegades prepared their assault, the loyalists did not bother to dispatch reinforcements. The exultant Mordecai of the Word-Bearers took position at the forefront of the attack, unleashing a new horror onto the battlefield. The doors of his dark red Spartan assault transports swung open and disgorged a wave of madness in the form of twisted and warped space marines, turned into a mockery of the proud Legiones Astartes they once were. Clad in armour that swelled and burst as new terrifying forms erupted from it, the vanguard of the Word-Bearers raced across the desolate wastes toward the towering bastion walls. They were not driven by duty or honour, but by an insatiable thirst for blood. This bloodlust consumed them entirely, stripping the warriors of the 17th of the tactical prowess that once made them some of the greatest warriors known to humanity, and when shots from the walls struck the leading creatures, it barely slowed them. The precise fire of pre-sighted heavy weapons struck the advancing Word-Bearers, tearing limbs off the monstrously transformed Space Marines, piercing power armour with shrapnel and ripping bodies to pieces. Yet many of the wounded continued to charge, oblivious to their horrific injuries, howling not from pain but from thirst for blood. They crossed minefields, which continuously leapt into the air at eye level and detonated one after another. The attack route of Lorgar's sons was littered with a scattering of decapitated corpses, and hurled themselves headlong into ditches filled with iron spikes. The dead filled them so others could break through and reach the wall. Each layer of the Imperial Fist's intricately constructed defences was breached not with skill, but with primitive savagery, repulsive to behold. Praetor Mordecai and the veterans of the Flayed Hand observed the spectacle dispassionately from afar, raising no blades to aid their brethren, nor expending ammunition to provide fire support for their assault. The word-bearers simply chanted a grim dirge in Colchisian, which sent shivers even through the battle-hardened warriors of the Sons of Horus waiting for orders to attack. While in the allied contingents of the Imperial army, legionary overseers in black armour had to restore order with force. What others might deem wasteful, Mordecai saw as a blessing, an offering to new gods that would unveil the truth of all future days and assist in Horus's ultimate ascension. Black smoke, mingled with the stench of burned and torn flesh, filled the air of the battlefield. A swirling sanguine mist rose and stained the sky crimson, and Mordecai, gazing upon it all, smiled. Blood for the sons of Cthonia. Flanking attackers, crude automatons bearing the grim heraldry of Cthonia, activated shoulder-mounted plasma weapons and began bombarding the towers anchored at both ends of Alf Prime bastion. In response, the defenders opened fire with autocannons and volkites, causing the massive robots to stagger but failing to break their ranks. The tower gun crews could not fire in support of the walls, distracted by the iron monsters of Cthonia. Thus, under the cover of Magos Drakovac's artillery slaves, the word-bearers finally reached the walls. 16 feet of solid ferrocrete without flaw. Fearless Astartes mutants maintained their relentless pace, driving their demonic claws into the wall and using the dead as steps to climb higher, paying no heed to the bolter fire raining down upon them from the parapets. As impassive as his enemy was furious, Adarus of the Imperial Fists gave the command, and a new force took its place on the walls. Noticeably smaller in stature than the Space Marines and clad in long cloaks concealing their augmetics, the siege engineers of the Charadorn Guard rolled out several dozen mysterious canisters, each forged from adamantium and marked with a Trinity symbol. Then the guardsmen cast them down from the walls into the seething mass of clawed flesh, where they erupted into searing flame, crawling from body to body like a living entity. These were Phosphex bombs, a terror of the Age of Darkness once more unleashed. The ravenous fire consumed the last of the word-bearer-possessed ones, leaving only charred corpses, some of which still feebly clawed at the walls even after death. The events that transpired signalled an attack by the Sons of Horus, as the word-bearers had literally paved a path to the foot of the wall with their own bodies. Letting out a deafening roar, the warriors of the 16th began their assault. Ranks of warriors in sea-green armour surged forward with near-perfect synchronicity. They numbered more than 3,000, with even more waiting in reserve. Nevertheless, the attack of Ashur-Haddon's legionnaires was far from a berserker's frenzy. Armed with axes, the Ravagers and elite raiders advanced slowly in disciplined formations, covered by volleys of bolter fire from Inductii squads and laser shots from Spartan assault tanks. The brutal songs of Cthonia served as their marching hymns of glory and carnage that echoed across the wasteland and were lost in the foul mists that blanketed the battlefield. These songs were echoed by warriors in yellow on the distant walls. Many of them had undergone ascension to Astartes on Cthonia and differed from their brethren below only in the colour of their armour. Despite sharing a common heritage, none of them spared the enemy, and the sons of Cthonia slaughtered one another without hesitation. The shooters below gunned down the warriors on the parapets, while those on the wall hurled grenades and thermal charges at their former kin when they came into range. The surroundings were a true slaughter, yet the attackers gradually gained the upper hand due to their sheer number. The Sons of Horus breached the wall with cumulative charges, while the breachers deflected fire and bombs dropping from above with broad shields locked together. Chieftain Rave personally led the attackers as the Sons of Horus broke through and finally engaged the Fist's garrison in combat. His axes were stained with the blood of enemy inductii who dared to block his path. The warriors of Rave demonstrated their valour by breaking through the enemy lines and penetrating to the heart of the fortress. Although the resistance they encountered was far less significant than one might expect from a fortification of such magnitude, even if every inductii in yellow fought with a fierce resolve, yielding nothing to their brethren in sea-green armour, Rave sought to find the old veteran Adarus in an effort to claim yet another trophy as an excellent addition to his collection. But the consul captain was nowhere to be seen. Nevertheless, the warriors of Rave achieved victory, and he himself cast down the broken body of the last defender from the walls, thus signalling cadre captain Ashur-Haddon and paying blood tribute to the memory of those who perished to wrest that corner of Cthonia from the invaders' grasp. When the fortress was demolished and burned, the remaining imperial fists and their allies retreated. Too few in number to hope to hold the ruins, and moreover most of their ammunition had been expended in the obliteration of the attacking wave of the word-bearers. Trailing behind them marched the army of traitors, passing through the shattered fortress in a bid to extract maximum advantage from their victory. Their extended ranks barely restrained themselves from the urge to utterly crush their foe. Alf Prime had fallen, and the path to victory seemed clear. Even cadre captain Ashur-Haddon felt the savage thrill of victory rising in his soul, urging him to advance with the second wave. As he had vowed, so it would come to pass. The hopes of the loyalists now lay amidst the ruins, trampled underfoot by his warriors, striding forth to triumph. Part 5. Eye of the Storm. The most dangerous moment for a warrior is when victory shines so brightly that it blinds him. Consul Captain Imran Adaris of the Imperial Fists. The bastion of Alf Prime lay in ruins. A singular, critical breach had been torn in the defences of the Imperial Fists, through which Varen Ashur-Haddon planned to hurl the mechanized companies of the Sons of Horus into battle. Instead of besieging and demolishing each outer bastion in turn, he intended to obliterate the weakest and risk concentrating his forces at a single point on the line, to outflank it and render the remaining garrisons powerless. It was a bold strategy predicated on the initial attack having been carried out with complete surprise, and that the remaining bastions of the outer defence line would lack the strength to oppose the Sons of Horus, or they would not receive the corresponding orders at all. Analysing the data retrieved from fallen outposts, along with the reports from his scouts, Ashur-Haddon concluded that the enemy's bastions had been deliberately deprived of some of their warriors, and the lack of response from the Fist's main forces to his assault on Alf Prime confirmed this hypothesis. The price of this manoeuvre was the death of hundreds of inductii of the Imperial Fists, who fought to the death for Alf Prime. This time, Varen Ashur-Haddon sent a significant portion of the assembled 3 companies into attack, deploying reserve forces and ordering their commanders to breach through with all possible speed. The treacherous host fighters poured through the shattered gates of Alf Prime. Both the Space Marines and the soldiers of the army were intoxicated by the exultation of victory and the thirst to become part of what seemed to them the decisive battle of this campaign. Having reached the thin strip of wasteland that divided the outer bastions from the massive inner wall, the mixed units of traitors received orders to regroup, properly establish communication lines, and prepare for the assault while awaiting further directives. But instead, many blindly rushed forward, for among the broken grey plains of Cthonia awaited the remnants of Alf Prime's garrison. Hardly 200 Imperial Fists, led by Captain Consul Adaris, held their ground, too slow to reach the safety of the inner wall in time, and too few to hold off the traitor host at the breach. Driven by the mania of brutal killings and the opportunity for a complete enemy rout, the blood-maddened word-bearers and the inductii of the Sons of Horus, lacking the discipline of veterans, descended upon the enemy standing before them. They completely forgot their orders in their insane desire to achieve the honour of ultimate victory, compelling the army to follow suit, scattering across the plain in separate parts, while the slower Terminators and heavy armoured vehicles lagged far behind the unstoppable glory hunters. Adaris and his handful of warriors stood firm in the face of the approaching storm, the calm commands of the venerable veteran and his stoic demeanour the only things holding together the inductii in the yellow armour of the Imperial Fists. None of them wished to abandon their commander while he embodied defiance in the face of the inevitable death. Varen Ashur-Haddon received only fragmented reports of the situation. His command cadre was still amid the ruins of Alf Prime, organising the second wave of legionnaires into combat formation. The triumphant shouts of the stray vanguard mingled in his multi-frequency command vox with the plaintive pleas of abandoned auxiliary forces, the carefully coordinated attack turning far more chaotic than the veteran captain had desired. Nonetheless, Varen could not comprehend how 200 warriors, however determined they might be, could halt the onslaught of the Sons of Horus. Soon his war dogs would be at the gates of the inner wall, facing demoralized and unprepared defenders, and then the final phase of his conquest would begin. Ashur-Haddon would allow his commanders to taste the glory, but he himself would savour only the forthcoming great victory when he presents conquered Cthonia to the War Master after the fall of Terra and Horus's ascendancy to power over the entire Imperium. Then suddenly, the command vox of the True Sun's leader fell silent, and the entire vox network of the traitors was drowned in interference. The most dangerous time. Before Varen could react, a series of sudden catastrophic explosions thundered across the plain, raising a massive cloud of debris and dust that obscured the entire vanguard. At first, the traitor warlord thought he had stumbled onto yet another minefield, but the explosions were far too powerful and distant from his column's path. Moreover, the Imperial fists had just recently run through this section themselves. Instead, as soon as the dust began to settle, at the sight of the explosions there was not a single body in sea-green armour. The disorganised attacking traitors were unharmed, but this time found themselves encircled by a ring of upheaved yellow earth. The explosions revealed a series of tunnels from which emerged warriors previously believed to have gone to the Presidium Arcs, warriors who came forth to engage the traitors in battle. For a moment, silence reigned on the battlefield, dust settling on the armour and the silent weapons. Then an officer of the Imperial Fists roared an order, and thunder struck the traitors. The very first volley annihilated many of the turncoats, though their scattered formation helped limit the losses. Even so, smaller forces would have been torn to shreds by the sudden barrage of bolter fire, cutting down unprepared warriors here and there. Ignoring orders and disconnecting vox networks, the Sons of Horus and word-bearers at the vanguard reverted to their base instincts and continued to attack. In turn, the veterans turned to the discipline absorbed with their blood and drew together, prepared to repel the enemy. The traitor host descended into chaos, with each unit fighting for itself, isolated from its allies. Standing on the shattered battlements of Alf Prime, Captain Varen could only watch helplessly as his strategic gamble turned into a catastrophe. All attempts by the Sons of Horus to gain access to the Vox network and tactical control systems, as well as to reboot them, failed. Ashur-Haddon's tech marines engaged in battle with a ferocious infophage that threatened to completely disable all their systems. By all accounts, this cyberthurgic weapon attacked the network of the traitors from somewhere outside. Everything they encountered during the attack turned out to be a trap. From the feigned weakness of the walls and missing enemy warriors who simply hid in concealed tunnels or underground barracks, to the captured outposts where traitors immediately set about looting data banks and caught the pre-laid infophage. Hundreds of loyal warriors were sacrificed solely to lure the traitors to this place, away from the support of titans, to where the legionary renegades could be bled and, in the long run, suffer such serious damage that any further siege would have to be abandoned. The final link in the trap sprang at the moment when the Huskars of the Imperial Fists emerged from the dungeons beneath the ruins of Alf Prime, attacking the rearguard of Varen in an endeavour to prevent the escape of that part of the treacherous forces trapped on the plains. Leading the Huskars, clad in heavy cataphractii armour, was Garius himself, who at last stepped onto the battlefield to personally lead his men to victory. His sparking power fist crushed ceramite armour and broke enemy limbs with nauseating ease. The two warlords finally met face to face. Varen feverishly gathered his bodyguards to cover the general retreat, while Garius unleashed his long-restrained fury, seeking to clear a path to his arch-enemy. At last, The power fields of the axe and the power fist clashed in a shower of actinic sparks, and the Chthonian warriors fighting around their lords in green and yellow dispassionately hacked their erstwhile comrades-turned-enemies to pieces in a bloody melee. Equal in both fury and cunning, both warlords drew each other's blood. Varen's axe severed the joint of Garius's greave, while in return the tyrant of Chthonia's fist shattered several of Ashur-Haddon's ribs with one mighty blow. Nonetheless, the most brutal weapon in the captain's confrontation would prove to be words, capable of wounding most deeply, and Garius seized the chance to gloat over his wounded foe. "See how well the sons of Cthonia fight in yellow. When you die, when you are forgotten, they will all become perfect imperial fists." In response, Ashur-Haddon gritted out just a few words. "They will never be yours, never." The second seal. Similar to the Shaitan Chalice, the area beneath the Alf Prime outpost represented yet another fragment of the occult network, for the labyrinth beneath the surface took the form of a Kolkis rune of a specific meaning. When Varen commanded the attack on Alf Prime, Captain Zedak Mordekar was one of the most fervent proponents of the offensive, placing his warriors in the vanguard of the advance. The ethereal power obtained in the first seal allowed the transformation of many warriors of the flayed hand so that all could see how the second seal would manifest in the earthly flesh of Cthonia. At the end of Ashur-Haddon's failed attempt to breach the Imperial Fist's walls, when blood stained the grey soil of Cthonia beyond measure, Mordekar beheld a different seal, consecrated with his own blood, the blood of an officer willingly marching to death in the name of Erebus's secret design. Ashes of Victory. When the treacherous horde descended into complete chaos, its forward elements were caught in a cauldron between the inner and outer walls. With their commanders unable to communicate with their troops, it seemed that the traitors would receive a crushing blow. However, Varen had, to some extent, foreseen the possibility of an enemy trap, though he could not fathom the scale of Garius's deception. He was now at the mercy of decisions by those commanders positioned on the flanks and in the rear of his forces, covering the advance of the sons of Horus. In the rear awaited Captain Mordekar and the veterans of the word-bearers who had not undergone the horrifying transformation that had befallen the younger warriors of this legion, while on the flanks stood the automata of Cyclothratha, under the banner of Archmagos Dracovac, whose force was known more for its dispassionate indifference than for loyalty to allies. For a brief moment, it seemed as if they were merely continuing to observe the massacre of the sons of Horus, conserving their own strength. But then the banners of Kolkis soared into the air, and a thunderous battle cry of Tempestus Sangis rolled through the ranks of veteran warriors, and Mordekar himself stepped forward and carved a bloody rune on his skull with a jagged warblade. When the drops of their leader's blood struck the ground, the word-bearers rushed into battle, and the grim dirge of Kolkis spread across the battlefield, for their assault served equally as a tribute to war and ritual. The roar of their shooting weapons was their catechism, and the shed blood, both their own and that of others, was an offering to the dark gods to whom the sons of Kolkis had sworn allegiance. Nevertheless, the Order of the Flayed Hand moved at a slow and sullen pace, and though the word-bearers' weapons were carving a bloody swathe through the lines of loyalists, encircling Alf Prime and trapping the traitors between two lines of defence, they could not break the enemy alone. Varen watched their advance from the top of the walls as Garius struck blow after blow against his bodyguards, knowing he would not survive this battle. True to the old customs of Cthonia, the leader of the True Sons gathered all remnants of his strength to stage a fight that even the enemy would remember forever. But then a deafening cry made the combatants halt. From the far flank, a swarm of metallic warriors approached, gliding over the wastelands on streams of blinding flame with a speed that no space marine could match, and the screams of their jetpacks preceded them. Completely controlled by the orders of their Archmagos and capable only of slavish obedience, the Thalax charged into the heart of the battle, firing their lightning guns. Dozens were shot down by the Imperial fists right in the air. The metal warriors exploded in bursts of flame as their jump packs detonated, yet more dozens perished in melee combat as the dreadnoughts in yellow armour tore them apart. and still the overwhelming number of cyborgs and their complete disregard for their survival determined the battle's outcome. Ashurhadden and Garius were separated by the onslaught of Cyclothraith cyborgs, and the Imperial Fists were forced to retreat, joining the main body of their brethren on the plains between the inner and outer walls. Moreover, following close behind his minions, Archmagos Dracovac managed to clear the key channels of the Sons of Horus's Vox network, and Varen was once again able to communicate with his commanders. Without delay, he ordered a retreat, instructing the commanders of the vanguard forces to withdraw to Alf Prime as swiftly as possible, so that the Imperial Fists would not annihilate the scattered detachments one by one. On the plains, where brutal hand-to-hand skirmishes and fierce close-range firefights inflicted significant damage on both sides, the Sons of Horus began to retreat, not like those fleeing in despair, but with the composure and discipline of true warriors. Only those at the forefront of the advance fell into a trap. These mixed forces, remnants of several battered regiments including veterans, inductii, and Chthonian headhunters, were commanded by Chieftain Rave. The fighters under his command fought as equals in a desperate attempt to hold back the loyalists. All were sons of Cthonia, whether they were Space Marines or Solar Auxilia. Armor plates of Rave were torn and battered in numerous places. His power axes sparked intermittently as their unstable power fields operated at their limits. He and those who fought alongside him had little chance of survival. Yet despair fueled their strength, and each fallen vanguard warrior took at least one enemy with him into eternity, fighting without restraint or hesitation. Warriors hurled themselves at the dreadnoughts to give their comrades a chance to strike these giants at their vulnerable spots, while the battered Justerin in cataphractii armor shielded the auxiliaries among the headhunters with their bodies. Captain Consul Adarus, leading the Loyalists' counterattack, saw in their bravery the last smouldering embers of the former legion of the Lunar Wolves, whom he once knew as noble warriors, and stepped forward to engage the chieftain Rave in a personal duel. The battle around them ceased the moment the two leaders met face to face. Rave literally charged forward, hatred and rage doubling the strength of his blows, but Adarus met them all with calm disdain. The moon-silver blade of the veteran Imperial Fist parried and blocked each without exception. Then, shifting the grip of his sword to both hands, Adarus with a single thrust broke through Rave's defense and pierced his armor, after which the bleeding son of Horus collapsed onto the bleak soil of Cthonia. To the uninitiated individual, it might have seemed that Rave survived the strike purely by blind luck. However, the true reason lay in the mastery of Adarus with the blade, which allowed him to deliver a grievous wound to the enemy that was sufficient to disable the leader of the Sons of Horus, but not to kill him. Standing over the fallen chieftain, while his own retinue, clad in yellow, was prepared to finish off the last warriors in sea-green armor, Adarus addressed his enemy with reproach. "Once I fought alongside the Lunar Wolves and considered them among the finest warriors of the Great Crusade. The oaths I swore in those times now weigh heavily upon me. What I see before me is something far less than what I once swore to protect. But in their honor, I grant you the chance to be worthy of their legacy. Now begone. Your presence tires me." The voice of Terra. The Sons of Horus withdrew from the battlefield, carrying away their wounded leader and leaving their dead scattered among the wastelands. Now that the enemy had received reinforcements in the form of Mechanicum and the Word-Bearers, Garius lost the initiative and did not pursue, instead leading his forces in full order to the inner walls. He did not even intend to hold the outer line of defense, for he knew that the enemy Titans would return, and now retreated to the inner wall with a significant number of troops, boosting the morale of his warriors and seriously weakening the enemy army. The Lord Castellant managed to drain the traitors, but the decisive blow was denied to him. His own men, and primarily Captain Consul Adarus, whose noble act had cost Garius the pleasure of cutting down the rearguard of the Sons of Horus in front of the entire traitorous host, would first feel his wrath. Those, in his opinion, who had not shown sufficient zeal in battle, he stationed as sentinels at the front gates of the inner wall, where these warriors would be the first to face a potential counterattack by the renegades. While Garius continued his preparations, most of the traitors were forced to return to their makeshift fortresses at their landing shuttles and transports, with only a few veteran detachments remaining to observe the loyalists under the sights of the Presidium Arcs' guns. Meanwhile, the Magos of Vos and Cthonia laboured tirelessly to cleanse the rebels' war gear of the technocurse of Graia. For as long as it remained in their Vox networks and command relays, the sons of Horus and their allies continued to be under the sway of Garius's cunning and deception. For all this, and for the aid rendered to Cthonia in battle, Varen Ashurhadden was compelled to acknowledge the validity of Dracovac's claims to the resources of Cthonia, though this became a source of considerable irritation for the Magos of Vos. The notions of honour among the sons of Horus did not allow him to ignore a debt of honour in the aftermath of the situation. Weary from the burden of political negotiations, Varen left his sub-commanders to continue the siege, and the first raids on the remote loyalist positions were organised just a few hours after the retreat. Without a doubt, the battle would have resumed in earnest after a brief pause, and the bloodshed would have ceased only at the very end, if not for one single incident. From the shroud of the Empyrean broke the voice of Terra, a message so dire that both forces fighting for Cthonia were stopped in their tracks, both loyalists and traitors, stunned by the reality of what had been spoken. The unthinkable had happened, something that many of these warriors feared, or conversely yearned for, but could barely believe in its reality. The War Master had landed on Terra and besieged the palace of the Emperor himself. The Horus heresy had entered its final stage. Garius secluded himself within the crenellated walls of the Presidium Arcs, engrossed for several days in heavy thoughts about the fate of his Primarch and the Emperor, while Sul Contep and his turncoat Thousand Sons withdrew to the Pharos Obscurus, in vain attempts to reach Terra for their own reasons. Shadow Captain Nethkal, driven mad by grief and rage, led many warriors of the garrison onto the plains to hunt down and slay traitors who had crossed their path. Only Adarus looked calmly into the unknown future, and his unwavering resolve became a balm for those standing guard at the Presidium Arcs and the inner walls, when all sanity seemed shattered and broken. What Ashurhadden had failed to achieve with blade and bolters to break the defender's spirit was accomplished in an instant by a few short words. The news sowed discord, even among the traitorous forces. Ashurhadden was entirely consumed by the idea that he must capture Cthonia before the War Master clashed with his father, the Emperor. A similar obsession fueled Mordecai of the Word-Bearers, who had been tasked with executing his legion's will on Cthonia before this fateful duel occurred. In turn, Chief Rave and Incursus of the Alpha Legion were tasked with fending off the Loyalists, whose fury cost both commanders significant losses in the battle across the plains and subsequent skirmishes, exceedingly fierce and brutal. A veil descended on both camps as noble lords and common soldiers united in their desperate struggle to muster the will to continue the fight, when all their efforts were rendered futile by the epoch-defining battle so near and yet completely unattainable. Both sides waited in vain for fresh news, for Terra had plunged into silence with no word of Horus's victory nor his defeat, only a grim silence that engulfed Cthonia and all surrounding systems. Many have questioned whether the course of the war has already been decided, whether the blood they spilled on Cthonia held any meaning beyond fueling the unspeakable hatred that filled their hearts in the final years of the Horus heresy. Others pondered whether this sudden silence in the void heralded some new, terrifying catastrophe, and whether this age of destruction would ever end, or if the darkness of the future prepared only an eternity of war for all. The death of hope? This was the last message received by Cthonia from Terra, relayed by a secondary astropathic choir from the Opal Tower, located on the outer perimeter of the palace. It contained all the coded memes and authentication imprints confirming its authenticity. It was one among a deluge of messages sent as soon as the mighty legions of chaos and destruction set foot on Terra. Yet it was the only one that managed to break through the ruin storm and reach Cthonia, although it had weakened and distorted in transit. Below is the transcript of the transliteration provided to Lord Castellan Garius. The heavens are ablaze, the sunlight is as red as blood. All the demons of hell itself have been unleashed upon us, led personally by the Prince of Traitors. All the long years of our struggle come down to this one single battle, the outcome of which will echo through history until the stars themselves fade away. The decisive hour for the Imperium is upon us, and those who perish in its defence shall find eternal life in glory.